All right, let's move on to the filly and mare sprint. You tend to think in terms of the male sprinters that it's 6 furlongs, but for some reason the Breeders' Cup has deemed that the filly and mare sprint should be a 7 furlong race, and so it is. There you see the top 14 pre-entrants. One on this list, Unrivaled Belle, which I actually don't see Unrivaled Belle on this list, but anyway, Unrivaled Belle was 14th on the list that was released. She has first preference in the Ladies Classic, so Renterval is the horse that is most likely to get in her place.
Yeah, and for my money, Randy, this is the best of the Breeders' Cup new edition races. I know that a lot of people like the Dirt Mile as well. I just think the filly and mare sprint has really stood on its own 2 legs quite nicely with horses like Ventura, and I guess Merrifield won the first one. That was a sea of mud at Monmouth. But Ventura and Informed Decision both gave such memorable performances these last 2 years. I think this race has really solidified itself, not just as a great betting race, they are all that, but a race that really is a kind of a championship determiner.
I don't have anything against synthetic racing, as a lot of people do, but it is kind of nice to get the Breeders' Cup back to good old conventional dirt where speed is king. And in this race, my top 5 definitely is oriented towards speed. Rightly so. I think is going to set the pace in here. She has proven the ability to run fast and keep going at 7 furlongs. She won the Bed of Roses at Belmont. Last time out, she was very impressive in the Ballerina at Saratoga. She can run hooked. I think she's got a chance here to just run them off their feet, take the lead at the start and keep on. Dubai Majesty, if you go back and you look at her last start at Churchill Downs, May 31st, in the winning colors, where she's trounced Secret Gypsy by 4.5 lengths. The best race in her career at 6 furlong distance, but at Churchill Downs. She seems to run better at Churchill Downs than she does at other racetracks. I think she may be, not to borrow a phrase from Wingman here, but an under-the-radar kind of horse. Sarah Louise, the Godolphin stable filly, is just rounding back into form, although probably not quite ready for peak form. Jessica is back, won the big sprint race at Calder for fillies, and Secret Gypsy is coming into this race off a winning streak. Who do you like in it?
Rightly so is going to be the speed of the speed, and we should remember, not that it is necessarily going to happen twice, but in 2006, the last time the Breeders' Cup was at Churchill, people thought that the rail was good and speed was good that day, and if that's the case again in 2010, that will certainly help. Rightly so. Randy, there's an interesting horse in here, and I might be getting on a tangent a little bit, but Nicole H. is buried on the list of also eligibles, not voted in. She's down at the very bottom. And if you were to go by buyer speed figures, which I know you not only enjoy but help create in some cases, she might be the fastest horse in the race. But she did it in allowance races, exactly. And those allowance races, buyer figures do not cut it in the mind of the racing secretaries panel. But how do you feel when the horses that are sometimes excluded, who in a case like Nicole H., if she were in the race, and in all likelihood she won't be, if she were in the race, she might be like the 3rd or 4th choice.
Yeah, but she's 50-1 to get in the race because she's buried at the very bottom of the order of preference there. So, to me, I suppose, buyer speed figures are the #1 handicapping angle that I use. And in this particular case, when you look at her last 2, those happen to be the 2 races since Michael Hushian took over her training. Yes, some trainers, have a knack with certain horses of unlocking hidden potential maybe that other trainers didn't see. But when you're talking about horses coming in from Europe and you're talking about horses coming in from all different racing circuits, I can understand why the racing secretaries and those who are involved in selecting the pecking order have to sort of be class handicappers, where unlisted stakes don't count as much as grade 3s, which don't count as much as grade 1s. And in this case, she's only had 1 stakes race in her life, and she finished 5th. It was on the turf going a mile. That's not her ball game. But allowance races are going to put her behind the 8 ball.
Anyway, I guess we're probably spending too much time on a horse that's not going to be seen on Breeders' Cup Day. Hey, one of our most loyal chat participants, Sherpa, is saying that this is such an evenly matched race, and we're busy mentioning trainers and racing secretaries and so forth. Aren't the jockeys going to be a key, perhaps not just in this race, but in some of the others where the competition is so closely matched? how do you see a jockey's role in a sprint race versus a route?
Well, I'll tell you what, you start handicapping the jockeys, then you're in serious trouble. It's tough enough to handicap the horses and to establish the pecking order in the horses. You know, when it comes to the riders and when you get to the Breeders' Cup, what you just have to do is just take it on faith that the riders that are on these horses in the Breeders' Cup are good enough to win with the best horse. Now, if you're on your local circuit, where there can be a pretty dramatic difference between the very best riders and the very worst riders, yeah, when you're handicapping, I mean, certainly you need to take into consideration if you get a jockey change from a bad rider to a good rider. When it comes to the Breeders' Cup, though, personal opinion, the jockeys are probably the most overrated handicapping angle of all. Now, the only time when I really pay much attention to who's riding a horse is when you're talking about jockeys that have a choice between a couple of horses and they go one direction. Sometimes that can be an indicator that you may want to take a closer look at the horse that they chose. It can be for political reasons, not necessarily picking the best horse, but in the Breeders' Cup with this much money at stake, most of the time, if the jockeys have a choice, they're going to go with the horse they think has the best chance to give them the big payday.
I want to get to my under the radar in a second because there's a horse here I like that is under the radar. But the one time, 10, 20 years ago, I was really concerned about who would ride, what European would ride in the grass, because I don't think a whole lot of them rode well over here. Now, today in 2010, that has almost gone away for me as an issue. I feel like the European riders ride the grass in America way, way better than they used to.
I think you're right. I remember watching horses like Indian Skimmer back at Churchill Downs in the Breeders' Cup years ago, and you would think, oh my gosh, why didn't they get an American rider to ride these horses? But you don't see quite as much of that anymore. Right. We don't have that sort of moment. All right, under the radar.
Okay, my under the radar horse in this race, as we hear the sonar or the radar in the background, is going to be My Jen. And let's take a look at My Jen with the maroon. Watch her. She's going to take the lead right there in the red and yellow sleeves there. Number 5, My Jen is going to win this race. But watch, she takes the lead, then she drops back. Now look at the spot shadow where she is. Despite that fast start, she was allowed to shuffle back into 5th. She doesn't look like she's coming. But now here she comes. She's going to run down Rapport and some of the others who are in ahead of her. And it just seemed like a really interesting trip, Randy. She had natural speed, but it looked like maybe they were trying to teach her a little something in that race. I don't know. I know Julian Leperoux, who rode her that day, will be on informed decision instead. But with My Jen, you have a horse who was, she's a 3-year-old, which for me in the dirt races I like. I think 3-year-olds, some of them still are getting better. So I'll be willing to concede a few buyer points or a few points in the buyer department for a 3-year-old as long as they're in the ballpark. She has speed. She was off for 8 months, caught a speed bias racetrack in the victory ride behind Rapport, comes back and has that interesting journey in the Gallant Bloom and still manages to win. I just think this is a horse who's lightly raced, getting better, has been taught a little something, is versatile, and I think she's going to be a big price. And even if you just go by the straight buyer numbers, she's really a contender just off her straight dope.
And you know who we've really sort of buried under the radar? We've only mentioned her one time. You just mentioned her in passing. The defending champion in this race, Informed Decision. I mean, I happen to think personally that she's a little better on synthetic racing surfaces than she is on dirt. She's 10 for 12 on synthetics. This, of course, is on dirt. Her last time on dirt at Saratoga in the Ballerina didn't go very well, although there was a little traffic trouble mixed in there as well. She doesn't seem to be quite as sharp this year as she was last year. She's back on dirt, so that's why at least I didn't put her in my top 5. And Wingman didn't put her under his radar. All right, we're going to take a break here. We'll come back. We'll take a look at the next 3 races, the final 3 races on Friday's Breeders' Cup card. Stay with us. You're watching our Breeders' Cup preview on NTRA Live.